Welcome to the Ignatius Press podcast, which has the descriptive title, the Ignatius Press Podcast. I'm Father Joseph Fessio of the Society of Jesus. I'm happy to have with us today our intrepid ordinary, who's anything but ordinary, Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone. And we're having this conversation on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the publication of this extraordinary book by then Joseph Ratzinger, The Spirit of the Liturgy. Here's my old copy, pretty beaten up. I'm sure you folks on the text side will find a graphic for the new copy, which is our 40th anniversary copy we did a few years back. And we're not the only ones celebrating this occasion. Catholic University of America has a conference called The Spirit of Liturgy at 25, the liturgical legacy of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. And Archbishop and I have not prepared this as a conversation. He's probably prepared something, but I wanted this to be just kind of a conversation because I know that he is a great admirer of Pope Benedict, and especially Pope Benedict's liturgical writings and his liturgical stance on things. In fact, he established in San Francisco Archdiocese an institute. What's its official name, Archbishop?
The Benedict XVI Institute for Sacred Music and Divine Worship.
There you are. And so certainly this is a conversation which I'm sure you're going to be interested in listening into. I've got a few points, Archbishop, on the several themes I think struck me most anyway in reading this book and rereading it. But I'm curious, do you recall when you first read this book?
Yeah, well, it was a long time ago, but I do recall it, yes.
And do you know what your reaction was at the time?
As usual, with my reaction to anything that then Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, wrote is very inspired. I'm very moved about how deep he goes in a succinct way, a way that's immediately comprehensible. He sums up volumes of wisdom and ages of learning in short, pithy paragraphs. So I was very moved by the very deep insights he gave, the historical perspective of it all. And it gave me great hope that this could be a catalyst for some authentic liturgical renewal that the Church has needed for a very long time.
Good. I remember exactly when I first read it because I was in the Ignatius Press former offices in a home owned by the Carmelite Sisters. Mm-hmm. And it was in fall of 1999. And he sent me the manuscript in German. And I was extremely enthusiastic in reading it. And the reason is because of this. I was on the board of an institution called the De Lubach Balthasar von Speyer Association. We met in Rome every year in February, and he was our kind of cardinal protector. So during the 1990s, I would go to Rome every February. We'd have our meeting, and he would come for a whole afternoon and evening with us. We'd have discussions with him, our meeting, then we'd have dinner with him, and then we would have recreation with him. And this was at a house called Casa Balthasar, which he encouraged us to found, and which he was, again, cardinal protector for. In fact, our team in here, Thomas Jacobi, is a graduate or a alumnus of Casa Balthasar. And we would meet after dinner, and these young men would be there. They'd ask some questions, and it was early 1990. And after dinner, we were asking him questions, and I said, "Well, Cardinal, are you working on any books?" He said, "Oh, yes, I'm going to write a book on liturgy." I said, well, that's fascinating to me. Now, as many of you may know, Ignatius Press is the primary publisher of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict's books in English. And one thing many people don't realize is that he's written very few books as books. Introduction to Christianity is basically his lectures at Tübingen on Christology. He's got compilations of homilies or essays or articles that he's written, but there's very few books. The two most important, I think, are this book, which he wrote intentionally as an entire book, and after he was Pope, Jesus of Nazareth, 3 volumes there. But so every year in February, I'd ask him, how is it going? Well, it's taking me time. At that time, he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now called the Dicastery, the Doctrine of the Faith. And so obviously he had a lot of responsibilities. But year after year, I'd ask him, and he kept telling me, it's coming. Well, in 1995, I was at a conference in Colorado Springs, and a talk was given by Father Brian Harrison of the Order of Wisdom called The Reform of the Sacred Liturgy. And it really impressed me, so much so that I began celebrating Mass as it had kind of suggested, using the options which the Novus Ordo gives me, one of which is to celebrate Mass facing east. And I sent to Cardinal Ratzinger a copy of this talk, and I asked him what he thought about it. And he wrote back a beautiful letter saying he agrees entirely with Father Harrison. We need a reform of the reform, but it must be done in a way continuous, consistent with church history and liturgical history and so on. And so I began to develop my own ideas on what should happen. And then in 1999, when he finished this book and sent me the manuscript, I read that and I jumped up and I just, gave a victory sign. I said, this is phenomenal. This is everything I've been thinking about, trying to do myself. But he said it so beautifully, and so concisely, and also so much rooted in both Scripture and the Church tradition, patristic tradition, medieval tradition, and so on. So, Archbishop, it was a real moment for me when that manuscript came. And of course, we published it the next year, 2000, which is why it's the 25th anniversary now in 2025. So I'll lead off, Archbishop, on some themes. I got a list here of things which, impressed me most of all. These are not in any order, but then I'll see how it correlates with your list. One of the first thing is all his writings begin with Scripture. It's amazing that he, no matter what the theme is, almost in every case, he'll go back and find a scriptural basis for what he's going to say. And the beginning of this book, he goes to Exodus, and Moses being sent to Pharaoh saying, let my people go that we may worship in the desert. And I always thought that was a pretext. I always thought, they want to get out of Egypt and this is a good excuse. But no. Ratzinger says in the beginning of this book, that was the purpose. It wasn't just to go to another land, another place, to have another country somewhere. But on Mount Sinai, God gave Moses not only the 10 Commandments for personal, moral life and the instructions for social justice and so on, but liturgical regulations. And those three together, personal, social, liturgical, all offered up to God, is the purpose of his calling those people out of it. So anyway, that again, so just the first few pages enlightened me because of the scriptural basis. Archbishop, give me one of your favorite themes out of here.
First of all, to pick up on what you said, yes, that makes so much sense. One reads through the book of Leviticus, it reads like a general instruction of the Roman Missal. Temple,
well, a little better, but
Jerusalem. So yes, the importance of the liturgical life. It's hard to know where to begin with his reflections. Certainly one thing that stands out most strongly in my memory is there's a reflection on East and the significance of East liturgically and symbolically, and returning to praying toward the East, not just in a liturgical context, but even he spoke it in personal prayer, that Christians always faced East. He spoke about how in the homes in the early centuries, the Christians would put a cross on the wall that was the East wall, so they would pray facing East. And all of the symbolic and liturgical and theological significance of facing East and the rising sun has made a very profound impression upon me, and has given me a lot of direction in my own teaching on liturgical life.
That I think is for me, the central message of this book. Of all the things he says, that's the one most practical and most theological and most profound. And that was the one, by the way, that I was most excited about when I jumped up and gave the victory signal. I was reading years ago in a history of the Crusades by a Protestant author, an anecdote about in Jerusalem, after the Crusaders had conquered Jerusalem, they basically, for many years, had kind of a modus vivendi with the Muslims, that they'd let them come and pray in their chapels. And there was just one of these Crusaders, kind of a rough Frenchman, came into the chapel one day, and this Muslim was in the chapel praying, but he was facing Mecca. And the Crusaders, you can't do that. You have to face east. No, I'm facing Mecca. And the Crusader actually picked him up physically and turned him to the east.
I remember you telling that story once many years ago. That has me to that story.
Well, actually, I don't want to spend too much time quoting the book itself, but on this fundamental issue, let's take a look at just a couple of the...
Page are you on?
Well, what page am I on?
Yeah. What page are you looking at?
Well, I am looking at
80.
My page 69, but if you have the new edition, it's page 83.
Okay, that's actually the page I have marked.
Okay.
83, yes.
And so he says, the fact that we find Christ in the symbol of the rising sun is indication of a Christology defined eschatologically, that is, towards the eschatology, the last things, death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Praying toward the east means going to meet the coming Christ. The liturgy, turned toward the east, effects entry, so to speak, into the procession of history toward the future, the new heaven and the new earth. A few lines down. Thus, from very early on, in parts of Christendom, the eastward direction for prayer was given added emphasis by a reference to the cross. So I want to step back a bit here. I mentioned Scripture. Of course, Scripture is historical about God's actions in salvation history. And Ratzinger Benedict sees the liturgy as the convergence of history and the cosmos. He talks about the view of the fathers and of Thomas Aquinas of God creating out of nothing, out of love. That's the Exodus. The creation comes out of God. He creates man. Man sins. Now God becomes man to bring man and the cosmos back to the Father. That's the reditus. Exitus, reditus.
It even speaks how creation, history is creation.
Yes.
That momentum, that motion, bringing it back.
And therefore the liturgy is that moment where we celebrate what Christ bringing the cosmos back to himself. And the Son is also a cosmic reality, right? And so he sees the cross and East as this unity of the crucifixion, incarnation, crucifixion, history, and the cosmos, the whole universe that God wants to bring back to himself. Then on page 70, the following page, about 4 lines down, page 84 for you. But finally, this turning toward the east also signifies that cosmos and saving history belong together. That's what I was just saying. The cosmos is praying with us. It too is waiting for redemption. It is precisely this cosmic dimension that is essential. I want to emphasize this. For a German who knows philosophy, Wesen or essence is a very important word. It's the core, it's the substance, it's the essence, it's the real meaning of everything, And that's why this first part of the book is actually called Das Wesen der Liturgie, the essence of the liturgy. And a few lines below that, that is why. Now, by the way, this is Ratzinger, who will become Pope, whom I claim will become a canonized saint and a doctor of the church. That is why, wherever possible, we should definitely take up again the apostolic tradition of facing the East, both in the building of churches and in the celebration of liturgy. That is a very important sentence. Apostolic. He's saying this goes back to the apostles.
Yes. So, and I love how he does not mince words. This in the last paragraph, when he speaks about at least putting the cross at the center of the altar.
Well, I knew you'd bring that up. Because
the Benedictine arrangement.
To me, that's the one. Go ahead.
He's trying to move us in that direction. But this is where he doesn't mince words. He says here that moving the altar cross to the side to give an uninterrupted view of the priest is something I regard as one of the truly absurd phenomena of recent decades. Is the cross disruptive during Mass? Is the priest more important than the Lord?
I know. But again, I do think that's the one small weakness of this book, because he, like you, or you like him maybe, is a very gentle, serene person who doesn't, he's strong in his positions, but he doesn't want to upset people. He doesn't want controversy. And so he will say, it may be too difficult now to change the altar and celebrate facing east. That may upset people whose piety now has been nurtured on that. And therefore, if we can't redo it, let's put the cross there anyway, and while we face the people.
Well, first of all, you may have noticed that I'm not always adverse to controversy when it's truth. But I do agree with, while you knew him personally, I didn't, but my sense of his thinking was that a very deep wound was inflicted on the church with this hermeneutic of rupture. That this is unprecedented. This is utterly unthinkable that a committee would sit down and redesign the way a billion people have prayed from antiquity, that has gone through a natural organic development. Would just sit down and redesign the whole thing. And we know now, thank you for publishing Louis Bouillet's memoirs, that is all engineered and manipulated by Bugnini. But so he knew this is not organic. This is not going to work. We're still dealing with this 60 years later, right? So he understood that to do the same thing is going to be just as disruptive, and we'll be dealing with the consequences for a long time. So I think what he thought you can correct or confirm was that reform of the reform. We needed to get back on track with what is an authentic, I would say, renewal. It's the liturgical renewal movement, right? So I think so I think this made sense where it would be too hard. It's going to cause a lot of disruption, but at the same time, maybe he was too cautious. Sometimes the authority has to make sort of strategic strikes that might cause some disruption, but it has to be rightly timed and rightly done. So now, for example, in our cathedral, I don't know if they've told you about this. In our cathedral, we're now celebrating our masses ad orientem.
Oh, I didn't know that. Congratulations.
So we, I have a team there that understands it. The rector of the cathedral, Father Kevin Kennedy, for many years now, over 10 years, he's been the pastor of the small Russian Rite parish that we have down at St. Monica's in the former the chapel of the former convent. So he understands the theology of it. It's natural to him.
Well,
They gradually, let me finish. They gradually introduced it, right? Rather than flipping from one Sunday to the next, now we're all going to go out random. They catechized people, gradually introduced it. He's pastorally wise. He started with the Spanish Mass. At 1:00 on Sundays, we have a Mass in Spanish. He started there. And then with the weekday Masses, and then the two principal Sunday Masses. So he gradually introduced it with catechesis. It's gone very smoothly. It hasn't been a glitch.
I just want to correct one thing about that. You said it's natural to him. He was my former student.
Oh, so you know him, yes.
At the St. Ignatius Institute.
Yes.
So I helped to shape what was natural to become a little more supernatural. Anyway, so that's good. And I think because he says on page 80 or 84, as I quoted, whenever possible, we should again face these. But you say, look, we're not going to do it like the liberals do overnight,
Yes.
And by the way, I think this is one of the reasons there's so much resistance to the Ad Orientem is that people associate that with the council, even though the council said nothing whatsoever about the direction.
Well, for example, at the start, you said you exercise the option of celebrating Mass facing east. Actually, the option is to celebrate facing the people.
Well, that's true.
And this happens all the time. This is how some people get a hold of the narrative, So communion in the hand is the option. That's a whole other discussion we could have. I think we agree about that whole thing. But even accepting it, the option is to receive in the hand, right? Now people think that's the way we have to receive. Only in exceptional circumstance would you receive on the tongue. Bishops have traditionally a bishop wears his pectoral cross under the chasuble. The chasuble, over all these things, put on charity, represents the charity of Christ. The pectoral cross is a symbol of the bishop's authority as a bishop. So we don't put authority over charity, right? That's a symbolic meaning. Now it's common to wear it outside the chasuble so people can see it, right? But now I think a lot of bishops think that's the required way to do it. So these things happen. They introduce an option, and then the option becomes the mandatory way to do it. And maybe there's this option to do it another way.
Yeah,
but it's certainly with regard to that. How many people don't know that the council never said anything about the direction of the altar? How many people know that there are rubrics that tell the priest to turn around and face the people at 3 points during the Mass?
I hope a lot of people listen to this podcast and they'll find out if they don't know already. One of the difficulties is that some changes you can make gradually. And I've done that where, remember early on, when I began to take a greater interest in Gregorian chant, I would just start to sing the Kyrie, and then we do the Sanctus, and pretty soon people got used to that, and then you could introduce more changes. But you can't turn the altar 10 degrees,
Yes.
It's either 180 or 0. So the way you have to do it gradually, just like you did, you catechize first.
And then do it step by step. Not all the Masses at once, but step by step. You get the people accustomed.
Yeah. And that brings up another thing. Once Ratzinger became Pope, of course, on that famous day, I'll never forget, 070707, July 7, 2007, he issued Summorum Pontificum, in which he kind of reinstated the, more regular use of the extraordinary form, as he then called it. But you remember well, I know you do, that introductory letter where he said, we need to have a mutual enrichment of the extraordinary and ordinary form. And really, I think a result of that has been very, very fruitful for the Church. By the way, I'm just reading a book on the history of the Council, New History of the Council. And Marcel Lefebvre, who was the one who we find is one of the great resistance to the Council, the churchal innovation and so on, he not only voted for the Council document, Sacrosanctum Concilium, but he issued a statement saying it's important that we reform the Mass. He said that the first part of the Mass, the priest should face the people when he's preaching. It should be in the vernacular. The reading should be in the vernacular. There should be a back and forth. So it's interesting that even Marcel Lefebvre, who's associated with the most traditional of the traditionalists, recognized the importance of a reform that the council wanted. Interesting.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, let's talk about music.
Well, I was going to say, you brought up Gregorian chant.
Yeah,
Gregorian chant's easy to sing. People sing far more, they'll sing Gregorian chant in Latin than many popular songs that are sung at church. Catholics are notorious about not singing. They'll sing Gregorian chant. It's so intuitive. It's so easy to catch on to. And it's the music of the Roman liturgy.
that's right. Well, in fact, let's quote Ratzinger on that, page 143 in my book. It would be page 157 in the new book, middle of the page there, just above it. Thus, in the musical sphere, biblical faith created its own form of culture. Now, that's an important thing he makes. A point he makes is that, it's not just that the church adapts to every culture. The church creates her own culture that integrates into it other cultures. But it's not that we're a slave of what's already there. And in the musical sphere, biblical faith created its own form of culture, an expression appropriate to its inward essence, one that provides a standard for all later forms of enculturation. But that's not the quote I was trying to do. Wait a minute here, 143. That's not the quote I had intended.
Well, let me talk. And that point about enculturation is that's one of our main efforts in the Benedict XVI Institute. We're commissioning new masses of sacred music that's in the traditional polyphony. So it's in the classical realm of Catholic music, but there are ways to integrate the culture of the time and raise it into the high sacred music tradition of the church. So with the Mass of the Americas, I told Frank LaRocca, our composer in residence, that I wanted him to incorporate the sounds and the melodies of the popular songs that Mexican people sing for Our Lady of Guadalupe, especially that Guadalupe hymn, La Guadalupana. So you can hear this melody woven throughout, and the sounds, the harmonies are sort of reflective of that, but it's sacred polyphony. So this is real enculturation. I gave him as an example. I wanted him to do with music, using the sense of sound, what the Franciscan missionaries did here in California with architecture, using the sense of sight. Look at a mission church. A mission church is a traditional Catholic church, but it integrates elements of the local culture, right? The colors, the designs, obviously the building material, they used adobe. But it's reflective of the local culture, but it integrates it into a sacred tradition. And that's so the church brings her own culture and then transforms the local culture. Now that's one of the most popular styles of architecture here in the West and Southwest.
And it's very beautiful, yes. Well, that leads me to another reflection here. How would you see what he says in this book in relation to Vatican II, which to me is still kind of a living memory, but for most of young people now, that's ancient history. But how do you see this in terms of what's happened after the council?
Well, this is important for us old timers to remember about how old Vatican II is. So you're a little older than I am, and you're a young man. I was a child growing up, elementary, junior high school, as we called it then. This is a part of our living memory, and it still feels new to us. But it was 60 years ago. Think about the years you were at the university, 60 years before that, how old that seems to you. For me, those same 4 years were the years that World War I was happening. So you have to remember, young people nowadays, Vatican II looks as old to them as World War I looks to me.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it became a World War III. And that's, I think, how Benedict saw it. He spoke about the Council of the Media. That wasn't the council that the bishops were at and what they voted on. Somehow, this narrative of rupture got a hold and people ran with it. And it's alarming to me how there was so little, if any, understanding of what the council actually said, let alone to see it within the context of the living tradition of the church, how often things were done contrary to what the council called for, such as preserving Latin in the liturgy, teaching the people to sing the Gregorian chant, the standard parts of the Mass in Gregorian chant in Latin, or things that were done that the council said nothing about, such as Mass facing the people, Friday penance, for example. Friday is still a penitential day. We're still encouraged to abstain from eating meat. People think, Vatican II just gave that up. So there was this gross ignorance and kind of rejection of what came before, thinking that this was what Vatican II was about. So I think he understood the grave harm this has done on the church. It's going to take many generations, if not centuries, to get us back on track to understand the council with this hermeneutic of continuity. Interesting, he called it continuity and reform. Rupture, right. It's not rupture versus continuity, it's rupture versus continuity and reform. Authentic reform is at the heart. It's on the inside. Well, what's on the outside is to help us bring about the authentic reform of our growth in holiness and configuration to Christ.
Right. That was his famous talk to the cardinals in December 22nd, 2005, his first address to the Assembly of Cardinals after he was made Pope. Back on music again, you mentioned how people can sing Gregorian chant quite easily. I've experienced that in my own life for sure. At Ave Maria University, we would sing the Missa Primitiva, Kyrie, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. And after, 3 or 4 masses, they would all sing it. And on Sundays and feast days, we sing the Orbis Factor, a little more complicated. But after 3 or 4 Sundays, and I'm telling you, I've been to a lot of parish masses in my life. I've never heard singing as full and as loud as without music. They learned those things. They sang them automatically. And a little anecdote here. I was in Australia giving some talks when then Bishop Pell was named Archbishop of Melbourne. And it was just 2 days before I was to get to Melbourne for my talk. So he called me and said, would you mind would you stay with me while you're here? Sure. Then could I introduce your talk? Sure. So, what would have been 200 people for a normal talk was 2,000 because the new Archbishop was there, And I gave my talk on active participation because that word first came from a Jesuit in 1890 with a wonderful name, Angelo de Santis, from Venice, where Sarti was the patriarch at the time. And in 1903, I think it was, when Pope Pius X was elected, his first writing, or one of the first, was the Tra le Solicitudini, his motu proprio, his letter on liturgy. And it was all about active participation. But the meaning of the word was going back to singing Gregorian chant. That's what was meant by active participation. So I gave my talk on that. And then in my talk, I said, let's give it a try. And I sang the Kyrie from the Missa Orbis Factor, which is somewhat complicated. And I said, repeat after me. And they did. It was pretty good. Let's try it one more time, And they did it. I said, now let's do it. Have the men do it one, and the women do it response. They did it. And 2,000 people sang that Kyrie. I ended my talk saying, quod est demonstrandum. That was what I was trying to prove, So,
living proof, yes.
Well, you have, is Tizzi still your choir director there? Yes. There's a wonderful German-born choir director and organist at the cathedral. Really, what a blessing he's been to the archdiocese.
Yes, and he has a choir school.
That's right. Okay.
Now at St. Bridget's, now it's at Star of the Sea, and so they're brought up learning this sacred music tradition, and they sing major masses at the cathedral.
I wanted to say one word about kneeling. Okay, I want to quote him on kneeling. He has quite a few pages on this, but
refresh my memory on this one. Where in the book is this?
It's on 194 in my book, or 208 in the new version.
Well, my paginations are different from.
Really? Is it 208 for you?
No, it's
Huh. All right.
but it's what it's somewhere around 208. Okay, I'll go look.
Okay. It's
Okay.
just before the section which begins standing and sitting with liturgy and culture. And he says, it may well be that kneeling is alien to modern culture, insofar as it is a culture. I mean, he had a great sense of humor. It's got a little soft sarcasm.
Yes.
It may well be that kneeling is in the modern culture, insofar as it is culture. For this culture has turned away from the faith and no longer knows the one, capital O, before whom kneeling is a right, indeed an intrinsically necessary gesture. You mentioned about how he speaks very clearly, and the man who learns to believe also learns to kneel. And a faith or a liturgy no longer familiar with kneeling would be sick at the core. I'll read that again. The man who learns to believe learns also to kneel, and a faith or a liturgy no longer familiar with kneeling would be sick at the core. So I want those who are watching that, I just want to ask you, is there any kneeling at your parish mass? It's a simple question. Is there or is there not?
Well, of course, during the canon of the Mass, there's kneeling.
So not of course. You think everybody kneels to the canon of the Mass?
Well, I think it's become rather rare nowadays that parishes people stand throughout the canon of the Mass. It was much more common 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
However, with regard to communion,
Oh.
there's another where you move in the right direction, and it happens sort of subconsciously. So we noticed more people were kneeling to receive communion. And I appreciate the devotion. I affirm it, but it does create a logistical difficulty. Sometimes it's hard for them to get up. It takes a lot more time. So we decided to put out kneelers. These are preludes, but they're long preludes. They can kneel 4 to 6 people. Okay. So on each side of the communion line. We put them there for those who would prefer to kneel. You may kneel at the kneeler. But the people line up in front of the kneeler, and we go back like the old days of the altar rail. They can stand if they want to stand, but we pass before the kneeler like this. The vast majority kneel. The vast majority receive on the tongue. You don't have to give them orders. You create the environment in which it's just conducive to doing it that way. And the ones who do receive in the hand do so reverently.
No, and by the way, we're waiting for the installation of the altar rail now because at the cathedral, because as you say, you do it gradually. And then now they're getting ready for that, right? And I had the same experience at Ave Maria. I told the students, this is in 2003. It was pretty much unknown at that time. I said, actually, current church legislation in the United States gives you the opportunity, the option, you can stand for communion or you can kneel. You can receive in the hand or on the tongue. It's your choice. You've got a right you can combine anything you want to do that, As soon as they learned that, and I didn't put any pressure on them, but I did have an altar rail there.
Yes.
They all knelt.
Yes.
I mean,
because you would create the context in which they're just naturally led to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, what is the natural response when you realize that God himself in the flesh is before me now? What do? You don't sit down and cross your legs, but anyway. Look, I think we've gone on quite a bit here. Any final comments you want to make, remarks or criticisms or corrections of things I've said?
Oh, no corrections. I'll bring up something. It's not with the Mass, liturgy in terms of the Mass, but this might be something we disagree on. I don't know what your thinking is of it, but at the Easter Vigil, I was returned to doing baptisms by immersion. We have a very respectful, decent, dignified, mobile, it's actually movable baptismal font, but there are icons on it. And so we've also revived the renunciation of sin with the soon to be initiated facing west. and then they turn and face east to profess their faith. And so I dunk them 3 times under the water. They come out, they put on the white garment. This is how we celebrated the baptism at our Easter Vigil. And then we celebrated the sacrifice of the Mass facing east.
Beautiful.
I'm inclined to think that no other cathedral, maybe even Catholic Church in the entire world, celebrated the Easter Vigil that way. But it's an ancient way of celebrating. It's authentically ancient way, not some kind of fabricated pseudo scholarship. We know they celebrated Mass. We know the liturgical meaning of it. And it does bring out the meaning of baptism very powerfully. And it can be done.
Were they wearing masks?
Well, we started last year.
Oh, in San Francisco, people still wear masks.
I know when I said I'm not always averse to controversy when it's necessary. You may know on that one I wasn't adverse to controversy.
That's true. I hope you're going back to washing the feet of Viri, Viri.
Well, I would consider that, but when that Pope Francis first changed that, the way I saw it was he changed the meaning of that ritual. That ritual was supposed to be a reenactment of what happened at the Last Supper. It's no longer that now. It's a symbolic gesture of Christian service. So what I have been doing, I could go back to 12 minutes. It's not going to be a problem. But I would. But in order to bring out the new meaning of that ritual, I have people selected who have different vocations in life, different ages, different ethnicities, and it's specifically a number that is not 12. So I have a priest, one of the priests celebrating a deacon, a family, mother, father, some little kids, a woman religious, maybe a lay brother, male religious. So I get a single person, get the variety of vocations, variety of ethnicities, and a number that is specifically not 12 in order to underscore what this ritual now is supposed to signify.
Well, it sounds exactly like the Last Supper to me. Almost. Listen, in the geocentric astronomy where the Earth was at the center and all the planets went around the Earth,
yes,
that worked for a while, but pretty soon the telescope was invented and they saw, well, they don't make a perfect circle. And so to try and keep the structure, they said, well, it's not the planets in a circle. There's an epicycle. It's on that circle. The planet's going around another circle on the bigger circle to account for the motion. And then as the telescopes got even better, that didn't work. They put more epicycles and epicycles. I would call your adaptation of the washing the feet epicyclic. Let's go back to Last Supper. Anyway, Archbishop, I'm so glad that you've been willing to subject yourself to my withering criticism and my attempts at humor. But I think this book is a book that does unite you and me for sure. It should unite a lot more people.
Yes.
And I'll end where I began. There's a conference at Catholic University of America, September 24th, 26th, on this book.
This book has inspired a whole generation of Catholics and continue to do so. Yeah. This one book, has done so much good and will continue to do so for generations to come.
Amen. And thank you all for listening and watching. God bless you all. Thanks, Archbishop.
Thank you.